It will be encased, or it will be covered with a black pall, we are told, and the well-wishers will be walking around it to do their the last respects to him.
You're absolutely right. It's
But
going to be placed in a glass case covered by a black pall, and a BDF escort will stand guard at the urn while it lies in state. And the
so
urn,
here we see his wife, Lady
Esquivel,
Esquivel, and that's his oldest daughter, Laura. I believe she works in the diplomatic service in the UK.
indeed,
And Miss Esquivel is the mourner,
the chief mourner,
the chief mourner,
on this occasion.
right?
And she's being accompanied by her special aide-de-camp, Major Megan Aspinall of the Belize Defense Force.
Indeed. And the state memorial is being furnished by members of the BDF. We can see them all assembled there. The funeral director is Warrant Officer Class 2, Delton Morgan, the Regimental Sergeant Major for 1st Infantry Battalion. The urn party commander, who we see here, is Major Ruben Kowo. Escorts to the urn are Captain Jairo Che and Captain Galen Roberto, and we see them in this picture as well. The cushion escort, as he's called, is Captain Adrian Bosch, and later on we'll see the sword party commander, Captain Elmer Mo, and they will play a role here along with the firing squad later on. So we see them proceeding at a very stately pace down Daly Street against the flow of traffic towards Queen Street.
Right. And then they will head down Queen Street, contrary to the flow of traffic, and head over the Swing Bridge and then over into the Albert Street area. And then the procession will then conclude at the House of Culture here in Belize City. So it's a journey from Daly Street to the House of Culture, approximately 45 minutes, more or less.
Right.
Again, you're listening and you're watching the State Memorial for the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Amadeo Esquivel, the country's second post-independence Prime Minister, who died on the 10th of February at age 81. He has been described as many things, but certainly one who was very pragmatic, very thoughtful, very careful, very deliberate in his decisions when he was the head of government from 1984 to 1989, and again from 1993 to 1998.
And we know that Mr. Esquivel was a very humble man, and he would recoil at the sight of such grandeur accompanying his passing. But so it is. He lived an extraordinary life, but he did it in a very ordinary way. And again, there can be no clearer expression of that than the fact that he lived and died at the same house where his mother, Laura Bolton, had lived. And, you know, that is the family home, number 8 Daly Street, and that is where the urn is proceeding from today. We see the rain starting to come down, and the urn is going into the BDF van for its procession up Queen Street. You mentioned his middle name, Amadeo Esquivel. That is, in fact, the name of Sir Manuel's grandfather, Amadeo Esquivel. And he married one of the Carrillo family members out of Corozal, and their son, John Esquivel, is Mr. Esquivel's father, and he too lived at that address, worked there for many years as a typewriter repairman. That's where Mr. Manuel Esquivel, Right Honorable Esquivel, got his talent for fixing things, his knack for fixing things, by working on typewriters with his father, John Esquivel.
And more than that, Jules, in addition to his knack for fixing things, he was a scientist in all respects. He taught science education at various levels across the school system prior to his ascension as Prime Minister of the country. I've read a number of tributes online to him about the same kind of pragmatic, careful, caring approach in his instruction from some of his former students at St. John's College specifically. and how much he cared about their well-being in terms of understanding the material and applying it to daily life. And I think that that's perhaps one of the reasons why he was respected in the way that he was.
Yes, indeed, and he was a teacher who believed in instructing by example, that because he was teaching physics, he should always give his students examples of how these laws of physics were applicable and how they operated in the real world. And that was one of his great quests as an educator. It's a career that he had to abandon. He had chosen it as his career when he came back from studying in the UK in the 60s. He went over there for a certificate in education, but he in fact did his bachelor's degree at Loyola University in New Orleans. Thereafter, he was accepted to NYU to study physics, but like so many students, he couldn't work out the scholarship arrangements, and he had to come home to Belize. He tried to reapply, but it never worked out, and he ended up teaching. And an interesting, but certainly not a fun fact, is that Mrs. Esquivel writes in her biography that for 50 years after he overstayed his visa in the U.S. while going to school, trying to work out his scholarship, he was still stopped by U.S. immigration and questioned. This is a man who is now Right Honorable, who is Sir, who he was still stopped and questioned because he overstayed his visa.
Indeed.
As a teenager or a young adult back 50 years earlier, but that's how it goes. But now all those worldly concerns are behind him. We see the procession of the urn. I think our signal may be breaking a little, and this is to be expected. We have a camera in motion. We can see the cameraman there running alongside the van, keeping up with the urn. Tomorrow's procession will be a walking procession.
Yes.
We hope the weather is agreeable.
Indeed.
But it's a very unusual sight for Belizeans out here today. This is not the kind of thing you see every day.
Indeed. This is perhaps the cadence of this day is certainly the second that we've seen in our post-independence history, following, of course, the death and the pomp and circumstance associated with the late Right Honorable George Cadle Price in 2011, I believe. Right. But by and large, the spirit of today is a reflection of who Sir Manuel was. A very simple, a very practical individual, and I certainly concur that he probably would recoil over the fact that they're making such a big deal over him on this occasion. But I think that by and large, we expect this kind of thing, and it would give certainly an opportunity for Belizeans to pay their respects in their own way in a COVID situation, certainly.
But I think it's also important that we underscore, he probably wouldn't have allowed us to do it much in his life, but underscore his importance, because historically the importance of Manuel Esquivel is hard to overstate, because he led the UDP when no one else could lead it. He took over the reins of the UDP. Mr. Lindo could not lead it. Mr. Golson could not lead it. Mr. Aranda could not lead it. And he took over the reins of the UDP, and that 1984 victory is what for the first time proved that we had a democracy, a functioning democracy in Belize. And when the UDP lost in '89, it was a close election by a few dozen votes cumulatively. But again, Belize's second transition of power, and it was peaceful. When they regained power in 1993, again a very, very close election. But I'm saying that Mr. Esquivel is really, his historical importance begins with proving that democracy works in Belize. And he occupied, there we see an excellent overhead shot of the procession on Queen Street, presumably from a drone. I'm sure it's from a drone. This is a combined media effort, Dale. All the media houses are inputting along with the government press office, and that's what's affording us this type of spectacular imagery as we see the procession coming towards the swing bridge, a bridge that Mr. Esquivel had hoped to replace in partnership with mainland China.
Right.
This is a little known fact. But in mainland China, he had negotiated an agreement coming up to the 1989 election to replace that bridge. And then the PUP came in and they established relations with
Taiwan in 1989.
which has been a long and productive alliance. And they built another bridge. So, these things even out, but it's a neat historical fact as we see them passing over the swing bridge. Certainly a historical structure throughout the world. And we see them coming across the swing bridge, and the cameraman faithfully tracking the movement of that urn, led by the urn party. And we know that the person holding the urn, I'm not sure if it's the cushion escort, Captain Adrian Bosch, or the urn party commander, Major Ruben Kawo. But they are faithfully holding on to that urn as it crosses the swing bridge.
And as I said, and as you rightfully said, Jules, after it gets over the swing bridge, it will make its way into the downtown area of Belize City, and it will traverse practically the entire length of Albert Street until it gets to the point here in front of the government house, the former government house, the House of Culture.
I think that they intend to stop at the office of Baron Williams.
Indeed.
And then do a walking.
Correct.
Right, walk towards the government house or /
Right.
House of Culture. But here it is, traffic has been stopped. Today it's coming straight down Albert Street. It went up Queen Street, but tomorrow it will go down. The walking procession will go down Regent Street.
Indeed.
And there you have a spectacular overhead view of that downtown area. We can see the procession proceeding on the left of your screen.
And again, this is all happening to mark the life of the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel, KCMG, PC. Prime Minister John Briceño, as we all know, announced on the 10th of February, the day that the former Prime Minister Sir Manuel died, he would be accorded with a state memorial. And so state and official funerals are the expression of the highest honor given by the government of Belize to public figures who have rendered outstanding service to the Belizean people, whether in the political, cultural, scientific, or social sphere. And so in the Belizean context, state funerals, by decisions of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, are accorded to former and sitting governors general and prime ministers and sitting members of the House of Representatives. And in this case, Sir Manuel was Prime Minister for 2 terms, and he sat in the House of Representatives as the area representative for the Caribbean Shores constituency, if my memory serves me correct. And then, by nature of their components, state funerals are more stately and prestigious than official funerals. So, as a result, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has spearheaded this charge, planning and executing all the arrangements for this very important occasion. And this is led by the protocol unit of the ministry, and they are coordinating all relevant entities in the execution of this duty. So, a lot of what we're seeing here is being coordinated by that particular unit in the ministry. We have the members of the security forces, we have members of the press office, we have members of the media, and of course all of this is done in concordance with the wishes of the family of Sir Manuel.
Yes, indeed. And we see the cameraman running along with the procession here. That's Channel 7's James Ayala. We know Channel 5's cameraman Dreams covered it up to the swing bridge. And like we said, it's a joint media effort. Love FM has punctuated cameras throughout.
Right.
And we know they have, Love will have one on Channel 7's building a little more down the street. So it's really it's a joint media effort, and it's great that we can come together in this, because we know that bipartisanship is was really a core wish of Mr. Esquivel. That is one of his, that's something he always strived towards, to sort of end it political tribalism. I would say he fought the battle and he lost, because we know that tribalism sadly pervades the spirit of the day. But certainly in the media, we are all able to come together for a good cause, especially since Belizeans, and Mr. Esquivel was widely loved across Belize. When he left office in 98, Dale, I won't mince words, he was loathed, he was despised, but
He
history has
was.
been much kinder to him.
I remember as a 15-year-old when Sir Manuel left office in 1998, sort of aging myself here in this process. But I remember the things that were said. He was vilified for a number of very difficult decisions that he has had to make. And in the end, we see that those decisions that he had to take, those very tough decisions on behalf of the country, resulted in a number of things that perhaps translated to some good, some comfort in the years ensuing. And so I think that that's the kind of leader that he was. He sort of thought in future tense, if you may.
He did, and remember when Mr. Esquivel came into office in 1984, he was just a 44-year-old. Mr. Esquivel was born on May 2nd, 1940, so I think the election was held
in December that year.
In December, so he was already 44 years old, but he came to office as a 44-year-old. And the person you meet when you go to the Ministry of Finance, or the Treasury building as it was then, was the IMF. The IMF was waiting there saying, Mr. Price has entered a standby agreement and we want to know what you're going to do about it. Imagine you've never been in government. No one around you has ever been in government. And the first people you meet is the IMF drumming their fingers on the table saying, what are you all going to do? You're in a crisis. And Mr. Esquivel and his team, Sir Edney Kane, we know there were so many others. We know Ned Vasquez was there. We know, I think Mario Arguez was also on the central bank. These are the people who helped navigate Belize. And don't underestimate the input also of, I think he still had the financial secretary from Mr. Price, Mr. Edmond Marshallek.
Right.
But I'm saying that these were the people who navigated Belize through that very difficult time. And by the time they left office in 1989, they were seeing 10% economic growth. That has only been surpassed once in Belize's history.
Indeed.
Again in the year 2000. But I'm saying that unprecedented, he led Belize from literally the brink of devaluation in 1984 to 10% economic growth in 1989. I think 1990, when the PUP were in, had 13% economic growth. Mm-hmm. So, it was really an economic turnaround.
And again, that's as a result of very difficult decisions that the country had to make. Certainly a number of financial and austerity measures that had to be undertaken at that time. And it signals that while it was a bitter pill for Belizeans to swallow, by and large, the result of those very difficult decisions resulted in an economic turnaround that prevented what you rightfully said, that this possibility of we're staring devaluation right in the face. And so, again, what can you say about somebody who has done undertaken these very difficult decisions? We find ourselves in a place where we've learned. We've had a series of teachable moments as a country, and I think that by and large tells us that not all politicians, he was the anti-politician in your words anyway, but certainly not all politicians think of, rescuing the party, but instead of focusing on the development of the country, a true sense of development in the country.
And I think he was the last of that in 98, putting the country before the party, and that's why he lost the election so spectacularly. But, it's Melvin Holtz who said recently, Melvin Holtz, as you know, has a terminal case of cancer, and he said recently he served in that government with Manuel Esquivel from 93 to 98, a time during which he says he received unprecedented support and got so much done. But what he said was that both he and Mr. Esquivel were dunces, political dunces, and that was in fact one of the criticisms that Hubert Elrington, his own party member, leveled at him for many years. But that is the reality of somebody who puts country before party. You're called a political dunce, and indeed you may be, because that's not the way to win elections.
Certainly not. I mean, it certainly didn't bode well for the fact that he had to make the very difficult decision in the second term of office when they had to retrench about close to 900 individuals
Yeah.
from the public service.
I think it was 180 open vote workers and 700 public officers.
Right.
So 870 to 900.
Right.
They had to retrench, and that was a decision. He was like, well, you know, we were facing insolvency, we were facing devaluation, and we had to make these difficult choices.
And
but
he was criticized certainly for making that decision that close to
I
Christmas
think
time.
criticized might be an understatement.
Indeed. Vilified.
Vilified. But, you know, it was the practical thinking. You've been underscoring that word. It was the practical thinking of Mr. Esquivel that, well, because Belizeans overspend at Christmas. So if I tell you you're going to lose your job, you won't overspend.
And you'll probably budget it better.
You'll budget your money.
I saw that interview that you did with him back in 1995, right around the time that that decision was made. And I also referenced the fact that it was in Ms. Caffey's book, and that was the thought process that he was thinking. So again, another indication that Sir Manuel thought in future tense.
Indeed. And, you know, no one has been able to bail that cat since. No one can touch. That is the third rail of politics, retrenchment. And that's what Prime Minister Briceño was facing in 2021. And nobody can ever use that word again. And that shows the kind of courage that Manuel Esquivel had, the political courage that he had.
So what we're seeing here on the screen, Jules, is that we have the Belize Defense Force Band. I believe that's it. We're seeing here walking onto the grounds here at the House of Culture in Belize City. Again, it's raining, the skies are overcast, wet Tuesday afternoon here in the Old Capitol, but we are we're sort of reflecting and honoring the life of the country's second post-independence Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel. Again, for those, a sort of a history lesson, he served the first full term of government, a full 5-year term, the first one to serve a full 5-year term after independence in 1981. He was head of government from 1984 to 1989, and would then serve on a second occasion from 1993 to 1998.
Yes, and so we see here the gathering in the rain, folks. It's a steady drizzle. It's been that way since morning. It's intensified somewhat.
Indeed.
So my respect to all the BDF soldiers who are out there right now. They're standing in the rain. Also to all the cameramen who are out there standing in the rain. They're bringing us these shots. I think that the band has advanced to the government house, and there we see the escort as well now entering. Originally, the plan, I believe, was to walk from the Baron Williams office here to Government House, but it's just raining too hard. And pretty much that escort unit. So these guys are now on Albert Street, what would be called Albert Street East. And they're passing ACC. That's where the cortege is. They're passing ACC, and they will turn on to Regent Street for the government house.
And so this occasion, unlike the situation we had with the first Prime Minister, Right Honorable George Price, in this case the family has not requested not to have a religious service, and so tomorrow there's going to be a memorial event concert that's going to be planned. That's going to feature a number of recording artists. We're also going to hear from the man that was Sir Manuel's deputy in the second term, the Right Honorable Dean Barrow, whose term in office ended in November of 2020. The Governor General is going to make an appearance as the head of state tomorrow. But on this occasion, on this first day, we're going to see the Prime Minister, Right Honorable John Briceño, join us here in the state dining room behind me here. And then that's going to be followed by the Leader of the Opposition, the Chief Justice, the Leader of the Opposition, members of Cabinet and other members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then we'll have members, of course, from the Esquivel family. And that's sort of the lineup that's going to happen here when things are more situated here at the House of Culture in Belize City.
Right. You mentioned the names. We know that the Cabinet is meeting right now.
Indeed.
Just across the way. So those members of cabinet will be coming over to pay their respects. And again, a very unusual ceremony insofar as usually when we say the body lies in state, you come and pay respects to the body. But Mr. Esquivel has been cremated as per his wishes. So you will come and pay respects to the urn. Now, we know that in the temporal state of human existence, once someone has passed, certainly from a religious perspective, we believe that their spirit moves on and the afterlife awaits. But it's a little bit abstract when you have an urn, so it'll be an interesting experience. But I don't think that it is that you come and necessarily speak to the person, although one prominent politician who will make himself known later on has told me he plans to speak to the urn to talk to Mr. Esquivel. But, you know, it is simply a way, I believe, of paying respect, of noting the man's life, and of saying, a great man was here, a man that mattered was here, and we must show respect. So while the body itself will not be here, there will be an object upon which to fixate your intentions, because that's what it's about.
And more than just saying a sort of a note, I think some will see this as an opportunity to say thank you, Sir Manuel, for your public service to this country.
Indeed. You know, we only have 3 Right Honorables. We have Said Musa, Dean Barrow, and we had, up to last week, Sir Manuel. And we had previously Right Honorable George C. Price. So I'm saying now we only have 2 left.
2 remaining, indeed.
Right? And we know that the Right Honorable Mr. Musa, I'm told he's in good health, but having suffered a stroke, he's not as ambulatory as he once was. Otherwise, perhaps you would see him here. We know that he and Mr. Esquivel, I was in the House of Representatives for many years when they were adversaries, and we see the urn arriving here now. If we could just switch over, I'll return to that narrative. But we see the urn arriving here. It's now on Regent Street at the entrance of the Government House / House of Culture. So we want to go over the urn party.
Yes, certainly.
Again, so the funeral director is Warrant Officer Class 2 Delton Morgan, the Regimental Sergeant Major for 1st Infantry Battalion. The urn party commander is Major Ruben Kowo. Escorts to the urn are Captain Jairo Che and Captain Galen Roberto. And there's a cushion escort, Captain Adrian Bosch.
And then the following, and in addition to that, the sword party commander is Captain Elmer Maw. The firing party commander, Staff Sergeant Gladstone Palacio. The aide-de-camp for the chief mourner, as I mentioned at the top, is Major Megan Aspinall. And the state memorial is being facilitated by this Force Sergeant Major Warrant Officer Class 1, Wilfredo Mahano, who is a graduate of the NCO Leadership of Excellence and Sergeant Major Academy.
An outstanding corps of officers.
Certainly, indeed.
And we see the band here as well. And we know that military music is what is known as the esprit de corps of any uniform or organized body worldwide.
In 1947, the North Caribbean Force, or the Battalion of Belize, maintained a drum and bugle corps. The British Honduras Volunteer Guard Band was formed 5 years later, in 1952, and amalgamated with the then existing drum corps. The Belize Defense Force was established in 1978, just this past January, marking their 44 years of service. And with that, the name change from the BVG Band, it became the Band of the Belize Defense Force. So today's BDF band has evolved from an all-volunteer into a military band with the mandate to establish a full-time military unit within the Belize Defense Force. The vision, as it says here, is to establish a professional, versatile military band with personnel trained at the military music schools, worldwide. The band is using both the tropical and full ceremonial dress, as you can see, for the state memorial of the late Prime Minister, Sir Manuel Esquivel. The band of the Belize Defense Force is much more than just a marching band. These musicians are required to learn to play second and third instruments. Again, sort of a commitment to, in case these kinds of things happen, there's some kind of a versatility there. Musicians have the ability to form smaller ensembles. The Harmonic Militants is one such ensemble. The ensemble performed at the pre-show for the official flag-raising ceremony last year. So today's program of music is being performed, includes the Prime Minister's Salute, that is the first 4 measure or slash bars of the Belize National Anthem. Chopin's Funeral March, Homeland by the Sea, a staple during September, the Military Escort, the BDF Quick, and Gallant Marines. So the band of the Belize Defense Force policy is designed by the Ministry of Defense and Border Patrol in Belmopan. The daily management is done by the Force Bandmaster, Staff Sergeant Trevor Major, and the administration responsibility is the Director of Music, Captain Kevin Campbell.
Right, so thanks for that, and we see that they're all assembled here on Regent Street. I don't know if they're not. I think they've sort of stalled because of the rain. Again, it's not a heavy downpour, but it is a steady and intensifying drizzle. It's really British weather, and we know that Sir Manuel, in fact, his wife, Lady Esquivel, is a British citizen. She's of Jewish descent. And so she grew up in the UK, and we know that Sir Manuel also did some studies there. They happen to have been at the same university at Bristol, but they never met there. They met later on when she came to Belize as a VSO, voluntary service overseas, as a teacher where she taught math. And I believe the matchmaker was the great Michel Perdomo, because Lady Esquivel worked at Palote High,
right,
and Sir Manuel worked at SJC.
St. John's, yes.
And I think they were both teaching math. And so Sir Manuel was friendly with Carlos Perdomo and Michel, who both taught at SJC.
Indeed.
And they became friendly with Lady Esquivel, and that is where the match was made. Through Michel, now deceased, and Mr. Carlos Perdomo, who served along with Mr. Esquivel for many years as his cabinet secretary. I should say, I think he was cabinet secretary under Dean Barrow. He was permanent secretary during the Esquivel years, but then he later succeeded
Sir Manuel
Sir Manuel
in Caribbean Shores as the area rep, and he went on to he went on to serve Belize in a number of capacities after Sir Manuel left office. Having spoken to Mr. Perdomo recently, I understand that he is abroad, having undergone some knee surgery. So
right, I think a knee replacement.
Right.
Told me.
Yes, and so I'm sure that he would have probably tried to be here on this occasion.
He was really a great friend, and now we see the rain has eased a little, and we hear the BDF barking its orders, and now we see them removing the urn, and we hear the band striking up now. So the urn is entering the compound, a very stately pace, and it's really quite a sight to see the level of discipline and also of formality. We know we are a very informal society, so these rigid, structured, disciplined events are really something to see.
And Jules, in terms of the time, they're actually a little early than we expected, because according to my original copy of the notes here, they should have been getting here and bringing this part of it at 1:45. So we're just a few minutes early in terms of the official look of what's happening here at the government house. But given the circumstances, I think the rain is sort of having an influence on what's happening here by and large. But you're absolutely right. The Belize Defense Force has maintained a strict professional standard throughout this entire process. And so I think this is a good opportunity to pay homage to them for executing this part of today's proceedings.
Yeah, it really visually is quite spectacular. Again, through the use of internet technology, we're able to bring you the whole procession, and through the combined resources of the media, we can show you the whole procession through the streets right into the compound of the government house.
So what's happening here is that they're bringing the urn into the state dining room here at the House of Culture in Belize City, and then they should have been here at 1:45, but at 2 o'clock or sometime around that time, the beginning of the ceremony and officials to pay respect to the remains of Sir Manuel. That's coming up at 2 o'clock. Again, as I said, it's going to feature the Governor General will not be joining us on this occasion, so the highest in rank is the Prime Minister, followed by the Chief Justice, the Leader of the Opposition, members of Cabinet who are also meeting across the way there here at the Government House, and then we'll also hear from other members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then of course we'll see members of the Esquivel family also participating in today's program.
And so we hear the band striking up with the national anthem, and we know that the family will be proceeding into the compound shortly, and we know that the lying in state is set for 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. and so the cortege is over, and they're bringing the urn now. We see the family there.
We see Lady Esquivel standing solemnly at the entrance as we witness the urn being brought into the government house. Again, Lady Esquivel is being accompanied by her aide-de-camp on this occasion, Major Megan Aspinall of the Belize Defense Force. So when they arrived here, the Prime Minister's salute, again, the Prime Minister's salute is the first few bars or measures of the Belize national anthem, as you heard earlier. And as they bring them behind us here to the state room, we see Lady Esquivel behind us here.
She's the chief mourner.
She's the mourner on this occasion, and her children and the grandchildren. The urn is being placed, and it will be covered with a black pall.
Right.
And this urn will be lie in state here at the state dining room of the government house. Again, it was placed in a glass case, as you can see, and it will be covered by a black pall. A BDF escort will stand guard at the urn while it lies in state. Representing to you the first day of the events marking the state memorial for the former Prime Minister of Belize, the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel, KCMG PC. We're live here from the government house in Belize City.
And now we see that the urn party is moving off. They did a stellar job, stately, formal, serious, highly disciplined, and they have installed the urn here, and now we expect that the ministers and others will be coming over to pay their respects.
So
we have the list, I believe, of We know that the
Prime Minister will likely be first, and then he'll be followed by the Chief Justice Michelle Arana, and then we'll have members of the cabinet.
we have the leader of the
And
opposition.
the leader of the opposition following the Chief Justice. We have members of the cabinet.
We have the mayor.
And the mayor of Belize City, His
Right.
Worship Bernard Wagner, also making an appearance here today. Members of cabinet, as we said, they were meeting for their regular Tuesday session here at the Government House in Belize City. Members of the Senate are also expected to attend, and of course the family, the Esquivel family. Again, you are watching and listening to a very, very important broadcast, a historic one for us in Belize, the state memorial for the nation's second post-independence Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel, who died at age 81 on the 10th of February. And again, this is the first day of a two-day event, which will culminate with a very special send-off tomorrow right here on these very grounds.
Right, and again, it is a most unusual state memorial, as it's being called. Mr. Esquivel wanted a celebration.
Indeed.
No, we all hear everybody say, when I'm dead, I don't want to cry, I want to party. Well, Mr. Esquivel made very sure of that, because there is no church service, there is no church component, there's no such element. This is an event that is straightforward. It is a non-religious event. Mr. Esquivel, we must be frank, was an atheist. He was not, and I knew him most of my life, he was not a strident person who would get into arguments about religious beliefs, etc., because he was very friendly with my father, who was a very ardent Roman Catholic. But I never heard them have one religious argument or a reasoning session, because I believe Mr. Esquivel knew that religion was very important to a large portion of the population, and he paid maximum respect to that.
But he also signaled in an interview in a documentary that was done by Shane Williams from the UDP Secretariat in 2018 that apart from that, there was an important component that was missing from Belizean society at the time when he decided to enter politics, the fact that there was this sort of abandonment from science and fact. And so there was this important, in my view certainly, an important interjection into that dialogue with the decisions and certainly the thought process that Sir Manuel had about a number of things, and the importance of how science played a role in our everyday life. And I think that philosophy also came from his teaching career at St. John's College as an instructor in physics.
Right, as a physics teacher, and we see that I believe it's the sword party commander, Captain Elmer Moore, who is now, we heard the squeak of his sharply shined boots. He's now paying his respects to the urn, and he will be leading the sword activities later on. That's Captain Elmer Moore.
Again, this effort is a collaboration of all the major media houses. The station that I represent, Love FM and Love Television. The station that Jules represents, Channel 7, Channel 5, and certainly in collaboration with the Government Press Office, we're bringing this to you live, streaming on Facebook, on YouTube, on your television sets, and certainly on your radios. So this is a very important and historic occasion for everybody, and this is a collaborative effort of the mainstream media to ensure that every single listener and viewer gets an opportunity to witness this. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the public will not be allowed to participate in these very important activities, but rather we're bringing it to you into your living rooms or wherever you are.
And you mentioned earlier, Dale, Mr. Esquivel saw as the incompatibility between, he said in that documentary, between propaganda and science. Indeed. Right? And he always had a major problem with propaganda, and people saw that as now we call it political campaigning. etc. But in the 80s and 90s, they called it propaganda. And he was always uncomfortable with, he was unable to reconcile what he believed in, which was verifiable fact, with promoting something that is in fact not true, but is political propaganda. And he said in the documentary that you narrated that it was so popular. So he really had a political Achilles heel, so to speak, in his refusal to embrace propaganda.
And that's part of the reason why I think politically he suffered a number of, he suffered those...
He was a three-term representative. If you look at the successful politicians in Belize, George Price, I would have to do the math to find out how many terms he was, but he had to be at least 6 or 7 terms. If we look at Said Musa, again, 6 or 7 terms. If we look at Dean Barrow, undefeated.
Since 1984.
Right, 84. So you can add up the terms, but again, 6 or 7 terms. You look at Michael Finnegan. These are the political legends.
93, I believe.
Right, exactly. So I'm saying that this is what defines political success in Belize. Multi-term representatives who go on to become prime minister.
Right.
Mr. Esquivel was anomalous in every way because he's a 3-term representative, 84 to 89, 89 to 93, and 93 to 98, and it chased him out of town. You know, there is a vignette of political, we see the various BDF officers coming in, members of the Sword Party coming in to pay their respect. But in 98, when the UDP was heading for a inevitable, obvious... Yeah, it was worse than a defeat. As you say, there was a meeting, and they all, Mr. Esquivel as party leader, it was a political meeting, and all the standard bearers were there to ask them for an assessment. It was like a heat check before the election. So this is going into the election, and we need to know, you know, you've done your campaigning, how you feel. Every man there stood and said, I think I got a good chance, I have a great chance, I could fight it, I could win it, I need this, that. Everyone was confident in victory, and you know how politicians are, they're always confident. Mr. Esquivel was the only one, the party leader was the only one who said, well, I believe I am going to lose. He was right, and 25 of them were wrong. Because they all lost, except for, we know UDP won only 3 seats in
which
that
were Dean Barrow, Erwin Contreras, and Michael Finnegan.
Right, exactly. And Erwin was beyond a dozen votes, I believe. Dean Barrow was uncharacteristically close to him and Michael Finnegan, even though I think it was 180. Right. That for him is what we call a low jump. So I'm just saying that, Mr. Esquivel, this is how his fidelity to the truth, to what he knows is the truth, and his absolute clinging to that, his steadfast belief in, well, the truth must be told though the heavens may fall. Can you imagine how the party must have felt if your party leader says, why are you going to lose? While everybody else is saying they will win. But this is the precision of his analysis, the accuracy of his vision, and his absolute candor. He told the truth, and he lost by a large margin, and he then did the honorable thing, handed over leadership of the UDP within the week, as I recall.
Yes, it was a very, very short space, and again, you mentioned something about the importance of propaganda in Belizean politics. You sort of alluded to it earlier, and I remember as a teenager at St. John's College at the time, when all of this was happening, there were several last-ditch efforts by the United Democratic Party to try to salvage this election, because I think in some measure the party knew that it was going to lose.
Of course.
But I remember at that time how effective the propaganda campaign was. I mean, nothing was hotter than that freedom train of 1998, if you remember.
I recall well, yeah.
And I, even as a teenager, when I was not able to vote, I wanted to be a part of that freedom train. So it speaks to the effectiveness of that Achilles heel, as you rightfully said. But beyond that, the truth was extremely important to him, and that was something that factored into a lot of the decisions that he has made, the fact that he's tried to be an intelligent, an emotionally intelligent listener, and try to make the best decisions for the country. And I think that when you look back and take stock of all of those things, I think history certainly, that's the reason why I think history has been extremely kind to him. At the time, the decisions were like during summertime when you're required to take your bitters, right?
Yeah.
Your cup of sorosy, your cup of sina and salts and that kind of thing. That's what those decisions were, because it would strengthen you in the longer run, certainly. And that's how I sort of frame it when I look back and I reread some of the things about Sir Manuel in terms of the policy decision, certainly for the economy, which was extremely important to him at that time.
We see there his honors. Indeed, those things were important to him, and all the accumulated medals we know that he received. I want to be more specific than saying the Order of Belize, because I think that is the order he received. But and of course he got the KCMG, the Knight Commander. I believe we only have, I may be wrong, but we only have a few of those in Belize as well, still alive, right? And I know that he was teased by a good friend that, but Manuel, how you they accept anything like sir? And he quipped to his friend that when you get old, you accept anything. So certainly the younger Manuel Esquivel would have not embraced being called a sir. But
absolutely not.
As he got older, that is what he told his good friend, that when you get old, you accept anything. But Dale, and you were talking about that 98 term, up until when we had the next re-registration, which should happen every 10 years. He did it in 1998, and that 1998, day before 98, 96, but leading up to that election, which helped the UDP to lose by even larger margins.
Indeed.
But again, not a politically popular decision, but he figured it's a law and you have to do it. So he went ahead and proceeded with the re-registration, which led the PUP to beat the UDP even worse. But again, thinking about the future, thinking about what is the actual job, what is the
as they
duty.
say in young people speak now, he understood the assignment. He understood the assignment.
We saw earlier that his wife, Lady Esquivel, Kathy Esquivel as she is known, who was a teacher for many years in this very area. She taught at Wesley. She used to ride to school up until he won, I believe. They required her to get a vehicle because she would be riding to school, and so that was in 1984, and I believe she taught really until 1993, because I think that between 89 and 93, Mr. Esquivel took over Price and Company.
Yes.
From his Esther Price.
Right.
And a family a company that his family still owns and operates.
And I remember the running jokes about that too. The
Yes.
fact that it was Price and Company and it was attributed to and they thought there was this running joke that it was attributed to the Prime Minister at that time, who was his political adversary, which
Right.
necessarily not in this case had anything to do with that. And you get these little vignettes and you appreciate so much of not just the measure of the man, but rather the historical circumstances that led to the measure of that man.
Well, I will say it like this. I don't think Mr. Price would have ever run a company named Esquivel and Company.
Right.
Any right-thinking PUP or UDP would say the first thing, change the name of the company.
name.
Right? But for him, that was the name of the company. That was the goodwill that the company had. Obviously, it's brand name. So he operated that 89 to 93, and then the UDP won. And I think that's when Mrs. Esquivel finally retired from teaching. And as I said, she had been teaching at Wesley for very many years,
Right. And
right around the corner from here.
yeah, she actually said in the memoirs that upon Sir Manuel's ascension to the prime ministership for the second time, she had to take over the day-to-day affairs of the company. But outside of the family company, I think that the impact that Sir Manuel also had on his children is something that I think we have missed from the discussion. They loved their father for all intents and purposes, as far as I understood it. And he influenced, and he sort of helped them chart their own way, help them, with their academic and professional success, but at the same time underscored the importance of the freedom of thought. A lot of my conversation, certainly with Ruth, taught me a lot of things about the political arena in Belize, the historical context of Belize. We understand why certain things are the way they are, and I think that was encouraged in the Esquivel household, and you get that sense when you talk to Ruth and Laura and David.
Well, yes, indeed, his 3 children. The oldest is David, the second oldest is Laura, and Ruth was the baby. And we know that Mrs. Esquivel has also, Lady Esquivel has also told in her memoir of the tensions, because when Mrs. Esquivel would be leaving the home to go on a political expedition, or at the time we didn't have the infrastructure we did now. When you go to Sand Creek, you're going for 2 days.
Right.
And she said she snapped at him and said, "Well, you tell us no all the time," because he said, "I can't tell them no. They asked me to come down to visit, and I can't tell them no." And she said, "You tell us no all the time." And indeed, those are the frictions in any political family or in any media family. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying that their union was quite unique. Obviously, she's British, she's Jewish. Mr. Esquivel grew up Catholic. He's Belizean, and it was only by she just came here as a volunteer teacher. She didn't know that her entire life would be here in Belize, and she's been an exceptional public figure in her own right. Mm-hmm. We know her later on in this era, laterally, for her mental health advocacy, but she has been an advocate for women's rights, children's rights, and a very outspoken person in her own regard, right? A very plain-spoken and outspoken person in her own regard.
I certainly concur. I mean, having my own discussions with Miss Cathy about a range of things, you sort of understand where it's important to think outside the box and not be afraid of that, and to be able to stand on your own and to continue to advocate for issues that are most passionate. And I think that because in this respect, some people refer to Miss Cathy as the First Lady, even though that's not an official designation per se. But I think that she had shaped that responsibility early on by some of the very things that you outlined. I think she was a passionate advocate for women's rights, education, certainly. And so when you understand who Miss Cathy is, you also understand why certain decisions Sir Manuel took. I remember reading the memoirs specifically. There was this discussion on the very controversial roundabout and the crossover by the Pallotta Junction there. Right. The controversy that stemmed at that time, and Miss Cathy willingly admits that she had some hand in that decision because it felt like the right thing to do to ensure that there was traffic safety at a very, very, very busy intersection in the city.
Right, she said she is the person who pushed for roundabouts because they wanted to put traffic lights, and that was the first big roundabout in Belize. And now we know that we have a culture of roundabouts in Belize now, and she said she's the one who pushed for that, and Manuel agreed because Belizeans were so familiar with the glorietas, as they're called, in Chetumal.
Right, exactly, and her understanding of how it should be properly used as a driver in the United Kingdom. She spoke on how that could probably translate better than the traffic lights in Belize, which there were so many advocating for at the time. And thinking future tense, Sir Manuel understood that, okay, if we put traffic lights there at a very busy intersection, we run the risk that it might malfunction and it will take an extremely extremely long time for the requisite parts to be replaced, and that would certainly cause a terrible disruption in how traffic flowed until that part is replaced. So again, the future tense thinking is something that I certainly will remember Sir Manuel most for.
Right, and yeah, always seeing with precision and accuracy things that we perhaps can't even couldn't see right in front of us. He could see with a type of almost a clairvoyance of how to avoid future problems. But again, it amounted for little in the great game of politics, but it counted for a lot in the game of statehood, in the game of nation building. We know that's something we ascribe to Mr. Price, rightfully. He is the father of the nation, that is indisputable. But certainly the modern economic focus of Belize, the service-oriented economy, the strong emphasis on investment on the private sector, those are things that the first Esquivel administration introduced. And that was the sharp contradiction between Mr. Price's mixed economy model that was quite popular in the developing world at the time. Mr. Esquivel pursued a far more progressive economic agenda, focusing on investment, focusing on diversification, and focusing on tourism. You know, that was the old mantra associated with Mr. Price. I believe the term is apocryphal, but tourism is tourism, right? That is what was said. And indeed, there are some facets of the service-oriented industries that we know that that type of servitude is not consistent with the proud citizen of an emerging nation, but that proud citizen has to eat.
Right.
And that's why Mr. Esquivel really, and Henry Young was the first Minister of Tourism.
Yes.
And they are the ones who accounted for that shift in Belize's economic focus, and that is a serious, and that's, you know, that has been the prevailing economic trend in Belize since 1984.
Right, and up to this point now, it's responsible for at least 40% of the GDP in terms of earnings and all that as well. And we've seen the effects of that under the COVID-19 pandemic, because there was almost a literal stoppage of the tourism industry. We've seen that economic fallout because we're not receiving that tourism dollar. So again, it was that future tense thinking Sir Manuel had that helped us understand the importance of the tourism product, the Belizean tourism product. And now it sort of catapults us to a place where there has to be this continued discussion on the diversification of the economy. And so I would imagine that had Sir Manuel still been with us up to this, still, active as he was, I could certainly imagine him coming up with some kind of a future tense solution to help us navigate through some of these difficult problems. And that's just the kind of thinker that he was. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that you have to do sort of predictions in science, and as a scientist, you should be able to prognosticate certain things given a set of conditions. And I think that was what helped him make a lot of the very difficult decisions I keep on harping on since during his time in office. And I think that today's event sort of helps us, gives us an opportunity certainly to reflect on why those decisions were important, but certainly how those decisions have helped Belize even in the decades after he left office.
Yeah, I think that we have to speak about the latter years of Mr. Esquivel. His life has sadly been punctuated by two terrible traffic accidents. The first one happened during the first term of office. Between 1993 to 1998, his driver, Lester Stain, a police officer, he ended up, I believe, passing away.
Yes, indeed.
After that accident, and that was Mr. Esquivel's style. Again, we know that most politicians, when they ascend to office, then get a big-time driver, and they I'm sorry, that happened during his second term, 93 to 98. My bad. But we know that they get a driver from their constituency, a political captain.
Right.
Mr. Esquivel got a policeman that was assigned to him as his driver, a very genial guy. And Mr. Esquivel, I said it earlier this week, every evening come home and then send a vehicle to go park at Raccoon Street, as he did on weekends, because it's not his vehicle, it's the government's vehicle. And he had his own vehicle, which was always, as you will know, Dale, an economy car.
Right.
He never drove anything but economic cars. I doubt I'm sure he didn't ever own an SUV.
Not that I can recollect.
Right, the only time his state vehicle during that term was a Range Rover, but that was parked every day at the police station. Now, if any minister go do that now, you laugh after them for false modesty.
Right.
But in this case, he just saw it as what you do. It's the company's vehicle. The company is the government of Belize.
Right.
But we were talking about the contrast between Mr. Esquivel and Mr. Price. And we know that Mr. Price was famous in another way for his Land Rover, right?
Yes.
So Mr. Esquivel, had a Range Rover, right? Mr. Price had a Land Rover. So that was a sharp shift in public thinking between 1984 and 89. But speaking of the accident, so he had that first accident between 93 to 98, and then he had a second one when he was working as a special advisor to the Prime Minister.
With ministerial rank under the earlier days of the Barrow administration in 2000.
And he caught in another terrible accident, and at that time he was already over 70 years old.
Yes.
And that accident really, I am certain that accident shortened Mr. Esquivel's life, because he had to have dramatic facial reconstruction surgery, and he was never the same again. He still retained his wit, his good humor, his intelligence, but from my observation, he was never quite as sharp again. Obviously, he's been through a very traumatic incident, so his public life, those accidents have had a really dramatic effect on his life, and on I believe, although he died at 81, I believe Mr. Esquivel had a few more years in him, and we know that in fact his failing cognition that he experienced late in life was partly attributable to that second accident, where he had diminished brain function, and that is how he spent his last days. He'd had a surgery, and he never quite recovered from it, as do most of our seniors when they have those serious surgeries late in life. And so his cognition was very impaired at the time of his passing. He was not the acutely insightful and precise Sir Manuel that we had all known.
And I reflect, and you say all of that, and I reflect on the occasions that I've had the chance to talk to him. I remember, I believe this was probably in 2009, when there were several attempts at the nationalization of ETL. He and I had spoken extensively on the history and how we got to that point. He explained with careful cognition the importance of that special share, which was extremely important to the company and the company's existence. I remember also a very important interview that I had done with him. I believe this was right around the same time. The United Democratic Party was coming off two very massive victories at the municipal elections in 2006. Zenaida Moya, as the mayor of Belize City, was just about to begin her second term, and there was conflict with the party leadership and Zenaida at that time, and there was this split on who should be the next mayoral candidate for the city. I think it was used in an advert, as a matter of fact, in an interview that I had done with Sir Manuel, when he endorsed Anthony Michael to be the mayoral candidate for the United Democratic Party in Belize City. And we all know how that turned out. Anthony was soundly trounced in 9 of the 10 constituencies in that inter-party convention. I think actually 8 constituencies out of 10. I think Anthony won by 8 votes in Port Loyola and probably 50 something in Colette. But in all the other 8 constituencies, Zenaida won decisively.
Right.
And those who supported, those councillor candidates who supported Anthony Michael, save for one, I believe it was, ended up being on the party's municipal slate heading into those 2009 municipal elections.
You have a granular recall of these events, Dale. I'm impressed. Of intra-party municipal convention.
And
the guys in the control room are asking us to take a 5-minute break.
Fair.
Or a brief break, not a 5-minute break. I think they just want to readjust some stuff.
Fair.
Some of the shots, and we know that in the next 5 minutes, the arrivals will begin with the Prime Minister. The Governor General won't be here today, she'll be here tomorrow.
So it will go from the highest rank. So Prime Minister followed by Chief Justice, I believe the Leader of the Opposition then follows, and then we have members of the Cabinet, House of Representatives, Senate, and of course we should have members of the family and other individuals who are invited on this occasion to pay respects to Sir Manuel. So I think, Jules, it's a good time for us to take that break.
We'll take a little break and we'll be back shortly with the arrival of the Leader of the Prime Minister, with the Prime Minister.
And all the roses dying, and I am dead, as dead I well may be. You'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me, and I shall feel how soft you tread above me. And then my grave will richer, sweeter be. For you will bend and tell me that you love me, and I shall rest in peace until you come to
And we're back with our very special broadcast on this very wet Tuesday afternoon here in Belize City. It's the first day of a two-day event. It's the State Memorial for the Right Honorable Sir Dr. Manuel Amadeo Esquivel, KCMG PC, the nation's former Prime Minister. He had served 2 terms from 1984 to 1989 and again from 1993 to 1998. Leading the United Democratic Party to victories on both of these occasions. I'm being joined, of course, by my co-anchor, Mr. Jules Vasquez, the Dean of the independent media in Belize, as they say. And Jules, you've been walking us through and giving us your own perspectives on a number of things. And as we see in the background behind us here in the State Room, Prime Minister of Belize and Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Honorable John Briceño, has arrived here at the State Room to pay his respects.
And in fact, yes, here we see that Mr. Briceño is paying his respects to Chief Mourner, Lady Esquivel. And we know that Mr. Briceño shared with us a very charming story of Mr. Esquivel's tour that he did, the Maritime Areas tour that he did with George Price at the time, then the Prime Minister. This was in 1991.
91, yes.
He did with Said Musa, who was then the Foreign Minister. And he and Dean Barrow, they did this Maritime Areas Act tour to garner bipartisan public support. That really was another era. And Mr. Briceño said that after that presentation at the People's Stadium, I believe, he went to talk to Mr. Esquivel to tell him personally, thank you. And Mr. Esquivel, in his classic style, was, thanks for what? It's my job. And so there you see Mr. Briceño signing the register of visitors who are paying their respects. But really, he said that encounter really kind of framed his relationship with Mr. Esquivel, because there he saw a patriot. There he saw someone who put country first, not partisanship. You know, he was going on a tour that eventually tore his party apart. It caused a rift in the UDP, leading to the NABR, the forming of the NABR. Right. Philip Goldson and others, Derek Aikman, we recall, I believe Hubert Ellington as well.
And Melvin Holtz, I believe.
I don't think Melvin was in that group. Melvin remained
probably,
to my recollection, but I know those 2 left the UDP, so he was on a very costly political tour, but in the national interest. And Mr. Briceño says, as he leaves, having signed his name and his remarks into the gesture, the first to do so, I believe.
Yes. And going back to that discussion of the Maritime Areas Act of 1991, I remember as a child, very young, my parents, I was considerably young. I was still in primary school at that time, but I remember the very heated discussions that were in my neighborhood, certainly, about this discussion, because I know, okay, so I'll stick up in there and just announce the arrival of the Acting Chief Justice, the Honorable Michelle Arana, as the second individual who will be paying her respects here to Sir Manuel on this Tuesday afternoon.
We've seen the head of government and now the
head of the judiciary
paying their respects. So yes, we've seen the head of government and the head of judiciary paying their respects. Sorry for the little microphone gaffe. And we know that that also the change of guard from the Sword Party is happening now as well. At the same time, I guess that will happen right after the acting Chief Justice leaves.
Right, and again, these are the important individuals who are first paying their respects. We had the Prime Minister earlier, the Chief Justice. Following the CJ should be the leader of the opposition, and then we should have representatives from the cabinet, then members of the House of Representatives.
You keep forgetting our mayor.
I'm sorry.
We know that Mr. Esquivel started his political career as a city councillor.
Indeed.
a part of the UDP team that won, I believe it was in 1976. They beat the PUP's Dynamic 9. Now,
Right.
make I tell you who made up on that Dynamic 9.
I'm sure. I remember.
Edwin Flowers,
Yes.
Said Musa, Lois Young,
Yes.
Leroy Tager are four of the names I recall. I'd have to check the record more closely to see who else was there, but I know it was a powerhouse group, but the UDP led by Mayor Paul Rodriguez with Manuel Esquivel as one of his councillors won that election. That was one of the first encouraging signs after a very good showing in the 74 elections for
Right.
the UDP, leading to a devastation in 79. And that devastation is ultimately what gave rise to the political career of Manuel Esquivel.
Yes. That 79 election was pivotal because it was a time when the Fort George constituency was considered by and large a PUP stronghold, and nobody from the United Democratic Party was able to win that seat. And that brought in the Venerable Dean Lindo. You know, his trajectory in politics, by and large, politically at the polls, certainly, began with that election, as I recall. And
I think Dean Lindo, I think Said won in 79. I'm pretty sure he did. And then lost in 84. So in 74, Dean Lindo won.
Right.
And that division, well, it's not anymore, but it was always close on the 50 votes, etc.
Right.
And Dean
it was
Lindo,
certainly not the PUP stronghold it is today.
no, sir. It was far from it. And so Dean Lindo and Said Musa were constantly jostling for control in that division. And these are two of the political masters, as we know, in terms of what Michael Finnegan calls the karate style of
Right.
politics.
Yes, indeed.
Right, which is you pad the list, and they were both masters at it, and those were some of the roughest campaigns there in Fort George in the 70s into the
Early
mid
80s.
80s, right? And so we know Dean Lindo won in 1984, and I'm pretty sure Said won in 79. Said Musa, Right Honorable Musa, won in 79. But it was a big loss. That loss for Dean Lindo is what made him unable to lead the UDP,
Right.
right? And that's when Theodore Aranda took over leadership of the
Okay,
UDP,
the UDP.
an ill-fated and short leadership.
Right. And it speaks to something that you had said on your program on Sun Up, I think a few weeks ago, the fact that the United Democratic Party is sometimes often quarrelsome.
There are very quarrelsome set of people there. You should know this, sir.
Right, and it's because there has always been, and again speaking from personal experience, there has always been an encouragement for divergent views. There is always this freedom of having differing opinions, even though when some might vehemently disagree with another within the same organization, there was always this, in a manner of speaking, a freedom of thought, and that's a reflection of even what we're seeing today as the United Democratic Party in the post-Esquivel era certainly encounters new battles in terms of its leadership and all that. So again, all of what I'm saying is to sort of help us put into context all of these, the political timeline of Belize, and we get to see an exciting and kaleidoscopic, if you may, a colorful commentary, an opportunity that I don't get to speak on very often.
Indeed. We know that the Guard Party has now changed.
Yes.
The Sword Party, has now had a change, and each of the members have come in and done their turn. We see now the leader of the opposition,
The Honorable
Shine Barrow.
Moses Shine Barrow, the area representative for the Mesopotamia constituency, now paying his respects here in the state dining room of the government house in Belize City, paying homage to the Right Honorable Sir Dr. Manuel Esquivel. As we said, the two-term Prime Minister died at age 81 on February the 10th. And this is the first day of a two-day program of events being by and large presented to you by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade in collaboration with a number of organizations. Certainly the Belize Defense Force playing a very big part, and our colleagues there at the press office, and of course the media collaborating on this very important, historical event.
And we know that Shine Barrow has a lot in common with Manuel Esquivel. I'll tell you why, because his ascension to the leader of the opposition somewhat has a parallel, outer historical parallel to Manuel Esquivel's ascension, but Manuel Esquivel ascended to party leader, but while that was happening, Carl Thompson, who was not the party leader, was made leader of the opposition by a vote in the parliament between the UDP's 5 representatives.
Right.
And that's how Shine ascended. And Carl Thompson was the Mesopotamia representative, as Shine is. And so there was orchestrated a move. The move was orchestrated to get rid of Theodore Aranda.
Right.
And so they knew that Aranda would vote for himself, and they knew that Philip Goldson would vote for himself to be leader of the opposition. And so there were 3 other members. I know Charles Wagner was one. I'm not certain of the other 2, but they supported, and Carl Thompson was clearly one.
Yes.
So 3 of them supported Carl Thompson as leader. So this removed Theodore Aranda as leader of the UDP, both in the opposition and at the party level, and opened the way for Mr. Esquivel to become leader of the party. Of course, we know Shine's ambitions are far different. He wants to be leader of the UDP, and that is on the way right now.
I remember...
is that the mayor? We missed the mayor, I think.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes, we had the mayor of Belize City paying his respects
His
again
Worship Bernard
to
Wagner.
a former councillor. We have someone else paying their respects now. I can't make out the image quite clearly, guys. If you could give me a close-up from our camera right here, because I don't think that was on the list, but certainly there are officials, but also invited family members and friends also who have been invited to pay their respects.
I'm not entirely sure, but it looks, I think when we get to the condolence book, we should have a better idea of who that person was. But in addition to the mayor, we have members of cabinet who will be paying their respects momentarily, members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then other invited guests. I know that there have been some diplomats who have been invited. Those individuals are on a select list who are allowed to participate in this regard. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the public unfortunately would not be invited to the state dining room, but rather it was Senator Elena Smith. That's who I thought it was.
It looks familiar.
Yes.
Indeed. And we see some of the well-wishers, and they invited by invitation only. And the family wanted to stress, Ruth sent me a message saying that it's not the family that has requested that the public cannot attend.
Right.
It is COVID regulations.
It is certainly the COVID regulation.
Right, they cannot have an open funeral at this time.
Yes.
So that's just the reality. We know that if they could, it would be a very different scene here.
Absolutely.
And we hear in the background they're playing a playlist of music. I have to assume the family selected it. We hear Moon River performed by Louis Armstrong playing in the background. And we know that Mr. Esquivel came from a musical family.
He certainly did.
His brother, Billy, who was a diagnosed, not diagnosed probably, schizophrenic, was a very proficient musician, and Mr. Esquivel grew up in a home with a piano, because remember, he grew up in the Bolton family home, which was a kind of grand name at the time. They were quite poor. Their name denoted a grandeur which their bank account did not contain, as Mrs. Esquivel details in her book.
And now we have the area representative for the Albert constituency, Honorable Tracy Tager Panton, former Minister of State, now arriving, paying her respects here at the government house in Belize City.
Right, and we know that Tracy had become quite close to Mrs. Esquivel, and she said she had called in and checked on Sir Manuel many times, and she certainly considered herself a family friend. I know that certainly she had worked with Laura at the ministry when Tracy was involved with tourism, and Laura was the director of tourism.
Right, I think Tracy, the Honorable Tracy, was Chief Executive Officer in the Ministry of Tourism at the time, and Laura Esquivel was the Director of the Belize Tourism Board at that time. This was in the, I believe, at the start of the
First term
first,
of the Barra
or first
administration.
term, probably going into the second term.
Right, indeed. Right. So, and it will be interesting to see, you know, the modern UDP is not beholden Manuel Esquivel. Sir Manuel is not a sainted figure in the modern UDP in terms of, obviously, he's a former party leader and he has great and unmatched respect. But he was not a political player.
Right.
Manuel Esquivel was not a political player, so it's not like he had, boy, the Esquivel faction. Those two words have never gone together in the history of politics. There's never been an Esquivel faction.
Absolutely.
Right? So, so it's not like you can say, well, I was Mr. Esquivel's favorite, as if that would hold any stock or currency in the current political ferment of the UDP, because Mr. Esquivel never had a faction. He was never a player. He never positioned himself that way, and that was his style. It's not because he couldn't have, he just wouldn't have.
Right.
Because that wasn't his style. And here we see the mayor of Belize City, Bernard Wagner, signing the condolence book.
Yes.
We know that, again, I will repeat that Faith Bob tells the story of when Mr. Esquivel was a councillor. I believe she was in that group as well. When Mr. Esquivel would pick up garbage, one of the big issues in Belize City at the time was sanitation. And Mr. Esquivel would be there, she said this in a documentary, would be there picking up garbage along with them. And that, well, I'm sure all politicians have at one point engaged in some type of menial labor for the cameras, but that time we did not have a free and operating media. This was the 70s. When you do something, you do it because you really believe in it.
Right.
It was not a photo opportunity.
Indeed. Indeed it was. And it helps to, I think all of these little vignettes, Jules, helps us to appreciate, like I said earlier, not only appreciate who Sir Manuel was, but to help shape the historical references. What was the mindset of Belize and Belizeans at that time? And again, this is I think, a good opportunity, a teachable moment in some way, to help us understand where we were politically and where we are today. And the pictures certainly are vastly different from where they were 50 years ago, for sure.
And you know, Mr. Esquivel was a big part, as we saw the mayor there, we know that Sir Manuel, I should say, was a big part of the modernization of Belize City, the infrastructure project.
Indeed.
Whose legacy endures when we see the canals,
the sidewalks.
The sidewalks with the bike paths, low though they may have been, and the favorite photo opportunity of Christmas 2021, which was the overpass. That was all Manuel Esquivel. And so his imprint on the city, and that was a big World Bank project under concessionary funding, but his effect on this city has been enormous. Sandlighters Promenade, that was under the infrastructure project.
Right.
And so, which as we know is a still much used recreational public area. And we have to talk about the Ramada. That was, they tried to scandalize Mr. Esquivel with that. In fact, he ended up winning a large libel award that he boasted put his children through school, $60,000.
$60,000, I remember that.
Right,
story.
so, and that led to the creation of BTL Park.
Right.
Because the deal was that the Ramada group would get a part of the Long Barracks, as they were known at the time, the historic Long Barracks where Charles Lindbergh landed, and that is why it was such a emotional issue for people, but Indeed. It was a disused area, and they would build a park, a public park in exchange, and that public park is now BTL Park, which we know is the the leading public space, the leading green space
In Belize City.
in Belize City. So all these are legacies of Manuel Esquivel.
Again, a reflection of how the man thought in future tense.
Prescient. He saw the future, right? He was not thinking short term. So, so certainly the mayor of Belize City. I'm not sure he recognizes the debt of gratitude that he owes to Manuel Esquivel, but we know that the legacy of the infrastructure project lives on. Those sidewalks are still there. Many may need repair, but the overpass is still there. The roundabout that was built at that time, the Belcan roundabout,
Right.
is still there, and those are in fact a very strong legacy of Manuel Esquivel on Belize City.
On the infrastructure path, and staying with that, Jules, I think an important thing that we have not talked about is the fact that, and you certainly remember the controversy that erupted, the political controversy, and some may think that that was one of the nails in Sir Manuel's political coffin, was the fact that this massive undertaking called the Central Bank of Belize building, I think it was at $50 million at the time, because of the amenities and the security features.
And also the steel piles. It was the first building to use steel piles
Right.
because it was right near the sea.
Right, and that building...
Care Construction, KIER, put the steel piles. Very controversial.
And I remember the big stink that caused. It divided so many of us back. It certainly did. Because I have, speaking from personal experience, again, this was when I was a teenager at the time. There were always political discussions at our house, because I have one faction of my family who supports one party, and we have another part of the family who supports the other one. So there were all these heated debates, and depending on whom you ask in my family, some may say that Sir Manuel is a visionary, and some may call him somebody who splurged on the few resources that Belize had at the time, and I think history has shown that that remains an important part.
Here we see Michael Finnegan, if we could just stick a pin on that.
Right.
Michael Finnegan and Philip Willoughby
Right.
to come to pay their respect. Philip Willoughby, again a former city councillor, like Sir Manuel, and a political hopeful.
Right. Philip served, I believe, 4 consecutive municipal terms, is
Right.
it? In 6, 9, 12, and 15.
Right, and Mr. Esquivel was an advisor, briefly, for that 06 group. And here
Right.
we see Honorable Michael Finnegan, who we know was very close. We know Mr. Finnegan was very close to Sir Manuel. He has said that he will say a few words to the urn.
Okay.
He came out with Mr. Manuel as a campaigner, with Sir Manuel as a campaigner in the 70s. And he recalls the time when they used to pay party dues. Now you expect to get paid by the party.
Right.
We know that at the time Mr. Finnegan relates that he and Sir Manuel and other campaigners would pay their dues to the party, and he's going to pay his respects shortly. And he really looks up to Mr. Esquivel, Sir Manuel, as an icon.
Indeed, and rightfully so.
Not only of the UDP, but of public life, and an example of an ideal public figure, not an ideal politician. And we know that is an art that Mr. Finnegan has mastered.
Right.
But an ideal public figure in terms of unimpeachable integrity, a clear and precise mind, and an absolute...
And simply fearless in the decisions that they had to make.
Right, exactly.
Very thoughtful, very pragmatic, very careful.
Right, so I expect that Mr. Finnegan will be going in to share his the words that he wants to give Mr. Esquivel. Though, as we say, it's only an urn. It's really just a way of, religious people say that meditation is a form of prayer. And so it's to go and meditate and fixate your thoughts on that urn, and to really as they're fond of saying now, Dale, of saying it into the universe.
Right.
Right? So I think that is what a lot of the well-wishers are here to do, to pay their respects in a concrete way. Mr. Michael Finnegan, we're joined here by, would you share a few words with us? You told me that you will speak to the urn, sir.
Yeah, but I will go to the urn, so
You-
you'll have to catch me in there.
I can't catch you in there. I could only go up to this door, but when you're done, we could contact.
Yeah.
When you come to the door, you'll hear, "Hi, Vaughn."
Okay.
Hear me as good as you can hear me.
All right, sir. I'll bring the mic as close as I can.
Yeah.
The condolence book. Okay, so while we sort that out, we want to remind everybody that you're locked into this broadcast, a national broadcast, the State Memorial for the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel, KCMG PC, the former two-term Prime Minister. As we reported, he died on the Thursday, the 10th of February at age 81. And today marks the first day of a two-day program of events here at the Government House in Belize City. And Jules Vasquez and I will be bringing to you today's program, and we'll be doing this again tomorrow to help you navigate what you're seeing and to sort of remind you of the very important points of Sir Manuel's life as a politician, as a businessman, as a teacher, as a statesman. And we think that this is a good time for us to talk a little bit, Jules, about, we were talking a little bit about his impact on the infrastructure that
Right, the infrastructure
of Belize City.
Belize City, that famous World Bank project, infrastructure project. At the time, it was a tremendous inconvenience, and we all had so much problems with it. But in fact, it was a very prescient project. We know that also Mr. Esquivel and Melvin Holtz were involved in the start of the paving of the Southern Highway. I believe
Right.
that was a World Bank project. It famously started down in Punta Gorda amidst a lot of protests and uproar.
Right.
But that
Certainly
Southern
that's-
Highway was a project that was started under, and the loan was secured under Sir Manuel along with Melvin Holtz, and that we know has made all the difference in terms of, at the time, Stan Creek was seen as another world, and Toledo another universe.
Right.
And we know now that those are the areas of greatest economic expansion in Belize. And again, it was the prescience of Sir Manuel to secure that loan that led to the completing of the Southern Highway project, which was completed under the PUP. It was such a good and undeniable project that it continued. But again, another benchmark on his legacy.
Indeed, and I also think not only of the Southern Highway, I also think of the start of the coastal road. I remember there were opportunities.
Well, that started with Hubert Elrington.
Right. But it certainly
under
was
the first UDP term.
right.
Here we have Mr. Finnegan. Let me go on.
On behalf of my family and the people I love closely, I want to say that we love the earth you walk on. Goodbye, my friend.
And we see here the Honorable Michael Finnegan embracing the youngest daughter of Sir Manuel Esquivel, Ruth.
So there we heard the words of Mr. Finnegan. He opened up with a salute. He saluted and he said, "We love the earth you walked on." He and the people he represented, you know, he speaks many times of those beloved people of Mesopotamia. And he did it through tears, Mr. Finnegan.
Certain, because it's, for those who know Sir Manuel, it's an emotional day for them, because while he was unassuming, He left a lasting impact on so many individuals, and as we saw, and as I described earlier, the Honorable Michael Finnegan and Philip Willoughby at the urn, there was this embrace with the youngest daughter of Sir Manuel, Ruth Esquivel, and I can't even begin to imagine what the Esquivel children are feeling at this time, and certainly Miss Kathy. And so our hearts and our thoughts are with them on this very important day.
Right, and here we see Laura Esquivel Frampton. She has brought her children, and they are looking at his medals, at the medals he accumulated in life, in this exceptional life. And we want to talk to Mr. Michael Finnegan. Sir, I heard your very moving remarks with the urn of Sir Manuel. What was the message that you had to give? Why was it important for you to come here and do it?
Because I believe that all he went through and what all the naysayers had to say and what they are saying now and all the political pundits, I said to him just now, history has absolved you, my friend. And I've said to him finally that on behalf of myself, my family, and my broader family, that we love the earth he walked on.
Excellent remembrance. Thanks very much, Mr. Finnegan. So, we heard there the final words of Mr. Finnegan to the urn of Mr. Esquivel as he was paying respects, invoking that famous saying, history has absolved you. I believe it is Fidel Castro who first said it. History will absolve me, and because he knows that the slings and arrows of political success and failure trailed Mr. Esquivel for much of his career. But in fact, I do believe he's right, that history has absolved him, and that in public life right now, you would long for a figure, an ascendant figure, like a young Manuel Esquivel. The UDP right now is in a sense at sea, lost in the wilderness, looking for a new leader who will lead it back to victory. If someone such as Sir Manuel Amadeo Esquivel came along, well, they probably wouldn't believe he would be the someone to deliver them from their long time that they will spend in the desert. But really, history has made him seem like, so many people have remarked to me over the past week, man, if we only had somebody like that again. How do I say it, brother? You don't know what you got till it's gone.
Right, indeed. I remember as a child, my grandmother certainly was an ardent supporter of the United Democratic Party throughout her life, dating back to the NIP days. And so when a leader like Sir Manuel came along in the 70s and the 80s, as a child growing up, we revered him. We were taught to revere him throughout that entire first term in office. And so this is certainly an opportunity for younger folks like myself to sort of put into context what we have learned about the impact of Sir Manuel and his lasting, enduring legacy on so much of Belizean life, and on this occasion, Jules and I have had the opportunity to reflect on a number of decisions that Sir Manuel made as the head of government and how important those decisions were to the future of Belize, the future that we are living now. And so for me, this is an opportunity to see how those carefully thought decisions came to fruition and how impactful they still are. Just in terms of infrastructure alone, Jules and I spent the last few minutes discussing that impact. We talk about the economic turnaround that he spearheaded in the as the 20th century was closing, and how much those decisions cost him politically.
And if I could, while we were talking about those projects, I mentioned the city council elections, and I wanted to correct a kind viewer has pointed out that it was a 74 city council election. Manuel Esquivel, he topped the polls.
Right, he did.
Right, it was a split council, but Manuel Esquivel topped the polls in the 1974 city council election. His first introduction to public life, he was a member of the Liberal Party, which had no electoral record.
Right.
It was really a party of intellectuals. Harry Lawrence, we think also of Net Vasquez, we think also of Paul Rodriguez.
Right.
Those were the seminal members of the Liberal group. And the other persons elected in that were Harry Lawrence, I believe, was also elected there. Philip Golson was on that slate. Actually, Philip topped the polls. What else would you expect? 4,036 votes. Colette Fitzgerald, I don't think he was elected. And then we had Paul Rodriguez, Carl Thompson, another Liberal, and Ken Tillett. They were all elected in that 1974 group. And then we know that, again, I think they won in 1977. That was a clean sweep. That was Paul Rodriguez, Philip Golson, Manuel Esquivel, Ken Tillett, Harry Lawrence, Lionel Tillett, Carl Thompson, Eudora Pitts, Jacqueline the Shield. So Mr. Esquivel was a two-time city councillor in 1974 and 77. And so he has a strong background in municipal life.
Indeed. And his daughter certainly mirrored that as we see her now, Laura Esquivel.
I believe she was a two-term.
She was also a two-term
city
city
councillor.
councillor.
We see Laura and her husband James Frampton.
Frampton.
Yes. I believe they reside in the UK. And we know that Laura came after he passed very suddenly at the Belize Medical Associates.
Right.
And we saw his son David earlier. He lives in the US, I believe.
Yes.
And so
She fought at the municipal level for sure. Laura followed her father's footsteps, securely winning the municipal, being part of the winning slate. And if I remember correctly, I think on at least one of those occasions, Laura got the highest amount of votes. As a matter of fact, Jules, if my memory serves me correctly, Laura Esquivel remains the municipal candidate with the single highest amount of votes in any municipal election at 12,951.
your memory is...
I believe that's the number.
Sir, you must be 17 years old. You have the memory of a teenager, but usually teenagers will remember their first love. You remember your first election. So, but that is...
well, 2006 certainly was not my first election. But certainly, I remember that because it mirrored her father in such a magnificent way. The People's United Party's popularity was waning at that time. This is coming off the 2003 by-election in Belmopan. The UDP ascended to office, winning 64 of the 67 seats in 2006. Laura Esquivel was an important part of that Belize City slate. I think she was the candidate that I think still holds that record with the single most amount of votes in any municipal election. I'd have to double check it, but I believe that's the case.
I'm pretty sure, because recently the votes for the top leading pollers have been 10,800, and that
Right.
so 12,000 is
12,000,
quite a
almost
remarkable
13,000
number.
votes Laura got in that 2006 election.
And that says the strength of the brand, no, of the
Indeed.
Esquivel brand. But
And coming close to that in that election was Hyacinth Lachman, who was also two terms at municipal with 12,780.
impressive recall of irrelevant numbers.
Right.
At least you got to use them today.
But I say all of that, Jules, to signal the power, the unassumed power of Sir Manuel. He never lauded it in his political life. He was always unassuming, he was very charismatic, and certainly in my point of view, always willing to talk to me and that kind of thing. But there was never an air of arrogance about him. And this is, I think, a lot of what he has done for this country helps us to understand the kind of thought process he, employed in making decisions and being that statesman, that leader that the country needed. We see now former area representative for Cayo South, Ramon Witz, paying respects here.
Who I believe was an employee as well
at Price and Company for many years before he was a part of that UDP team in 2008. And Ramon Witz actually is the last UDP representative to win in Cayo South.
Right, and we know that Mr. Witz he has a very reverential view of Sir Manuel.
Indeed.
I believe a former security officer working in intelligence as well.
I think he worked in that very controversial SIS, I believe.
I believe he did.
And I think the likes of Alberto August, perhaps.
Right,
indeed. And those
indeed.
individuals who still hold and still form an integral part of the makeup of the United Democratic Party even now.
Right, and so we know that Mr. Witz is a Esquivel ultra loyalist, right? So of course we would expect to see him here today paying his respects. I think all the official visitors have come now. It's just others that the family have invited, but
right.
It's an awful rainy day.
Indeed.
And so that is a thing. But so far it is the first state funeral we've seen. I'm sure you worked at Dame Manita's, Dr. Dame Manita's funeral.
Right.
And we know that again, it is the first time we've had an urn. We see it very clearly there. Line, an urn line state.
Lying in state.
Right. So, but it hasn't seemed to profoundly affect those who have come to pay their respects. They again are able to fixate their intentions, their prayers, or
their thoughts,
whatever
their
last words, exactly their thoughts. We know that Mr. Finnegan gave him an absolution.
And rightfully so, I think, Jules, because from our discussions since this broadcast started a bit after 1 o'clock, all we've been able to really focus on was the decisions that seemed like Sarasi and Sina in the initial stage, the bitterness resulting in things that still hold an important mainstay in our Belizean framework, both at the infrastructural, at the statesmanship, the diplomatic, and certainly at the economic level, I think. And those decisions, while were largely unpopular, proved very beneficial to the development of the country and by and large how we see ourselves as Belizeans today.
And we think of the line from Shakespeare, when comes such another? We know that the line goes, here was a Caesar, when comes such another? Also, he's left you all his walkways in his private gardens and newly planted orchard on this side of the Tiber River, it goes on. He's left them to you and his heirs forever.
Right.
Public pleasures in which you will be able to stroll and relax. Again, another context, but strangely apropos. And indeed, with Sir Manuel, we have to ask, when comes another like him, such an unusual figure in public life? I will venture, everyone I've interviewed about it ventures to say never, because he was in my estimation, the anti-politician, the consummate public figure who put country before party. And in that regard, that is not the mode of political survival or operation in the 21st century.
I think because the reason for that, Jules, is because I don't think he ever wanted to be a politician. There was never this need to ascribe power unto himself. It's just that he went in there thinking that it is imperative that his intervention does something to lend to the development of this country in such a meaningful and powerful way. And he thought that because the country needed it and because he thought that he had what it takes to do it, he just stepped up to the plate and did what had to be done. And that's the bottom line. There was never an urge to be maximum leader for anything. It's just to signal clearly that I am here for Belize, and as a Belizean, I have to do what I need to do to save my country. And I think that's by and large the mindset that he had going into politics.
And we cannot sugarcoat it. Many associate Manuel Esquivel, Sir Manuel, with great pain.
Yep.
Those persons who were retrenched, they think of him as causing great and inestimable pain and derailment in their lives. I know that he argued that he may have saved them from a dead-end career, because we know that the public service is full of so much fat, so much people doing what is called busy work, which is something close to nothing.
Right.
Just pretending to be busy. So that was his argument. But people felt a lot of pain. We know the VAT was one of the most unpopular, the value-added tax was one of the most unpopular initiatives in the history of politics in Belize.
Certainly.
It was eventually replaced by a 12.5% GST, which was basically the same thing. But we know that Manuel Esquivel, for many, is associated with great political miscalculation and great personal pain. It was not his intent, and we know that these things have, as I said, the VAT has only become the GST for 2.5% less. But those are things that will forever be associated with him, as Michael Finnegan has offered. He's absolved, and I think in large part he is, because when we have seen the grotesqueries of governments after him, boy, with a gladness on VAT after the liquid tech with super bond.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
You understand what I mean? Like that, like the $500 million pain of super bond, and that and all that it has done to hamstring our country's resources, limited financial resources, would be a break. GST or VAT would be a break compared to that. So, indeed, history may absolve him, but it's a very live argument. You can argue it either way.
Well, I mean, if you take the perspective of the 860 plus public sector workers who were laid off between 1995 and some of them who suffered wage freezes between 1995 and 1997, they might still have a different view of this person who had to make such a tough decision. But I think by and large, again, and this is an opportunity for me to say this, that again, he thought future tense. And those individuals who were affected by the wage freeze, as you can remember, had received shares in the very, very, very profitable BTL. Those whose salaries were affected in those 2 years. And now what has happened is that there is this battle in the courts now to determine how will that money be spent. And sadly, some of those 800 plus workers have died and did not necessarily see the fruits of that money. So again, we're thinking of the lasting effects of decisions that he had made, and that was certainly one of them.
Indeed, there's a large record of public decisions that we are still reckoning with in the first fifth of this 21st century. But what we'll do is we'll take a brief break,
right,
to hydrate, and in the meantime we'll just leave you. The feed will continue to roll with we know that music is playing as per Mr. Esquivel's choice, and on a rainy day the mood is I'm not out there in the crowd, but the rain certainly lends itself to a certain sadness,
somberness,
indeed, but at the same time,
an opportunity to reflect,
indeed, right,
an introspection, if you may.
right. So we'll take a brief break now, and we'll continue our stream with just some scenes of the urn and the grounds, etc. So we'll be back shortly, folks.
Thank you.
It must have been cold there in my shadow to never have sunlight on your face. You were content to let me shine, that's your way. You always walked a step behind. So I was the one with all the glory, while you were the one with all the strength. A beautiful face without a name.
deep in the mind. I'm crossing you in style someday. Oh, dream maker, you heart breaker, wherever you are going, I'm going your way. Two drifters off to see the world. There's such a lot of world to see. We're after the same rainbows in waiting round the bend. My huckleberry friend, Moon River, and me.
The summers are gone and all the roses dying. 'Tis you must go and I must bide. But come me back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow. And I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, oh, Danny boy, I love you so. But if you come and all the roses dying and I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me, and I shall feel how soft you tread above me, and then my grave will richer, sweeter be, for you will bend and tell me that you love and I shall rest in peace until you come to me. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so.
Somewhere a place for us, peace and quiet and open air. Wait for us somewhere. There's a time for us someday, a time for us, time together with time to spare, time to learn, time to care. Someday, somewhere, we'll find a new way of living. We'll find a way of forgiving somewhere. There's a place for us, a time and place for us. Hold my hand and we're halfway there. Hold my hand and I'll take you there. Somehow, someday, try to set it down. Sleep, sleep, I couldn't sleep tonight, not for all the jewels in the crown. I could have danced all night, I could have danced all night, and still have begged for more. I could have spread my wings and done 1,000 things I've never done before. I'll never know what made it so exciting. made it so exciting. Why, all at once my heart took flight.
Welcome back as we bring to you the first day of a two-day program marking the State Memorial for the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Amadeo Esquivel, KCMG, PC, the former two-term Prime Minister. As we mentioned throughout this broadcast, the former Prime Minister died at age 81 on February the 10th, and these today and tomorrow will be the official send-off. Today we are witnessing members of cabinet now standing and paying their respects to the urn. Earlier we saw Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Natural Resources, the Honorable Curdell Hyde, and I believe that was Minister of Transport earlier, Honorable Rodwell Ferguson, the Honorable Kareem Musa, Minister of Home Affairs and New Industries, and now we have the Minister of the Public Service, Constitutional and Political Reform and Religious Affairs, the Honorable Henry Charles Usher.
Indeed, we know that they are all coming over now. Cabinet in the adjoining building has just finished here at the Government House. And so these gentlemen have and ladies have made their way over. Here we have, this is actually Jesse Graniel, a dear family friend, and Mary Vasquez, my sister,
Yes.
also a dear family friend, and they are paying their respects. We know that a little known fact is that the Graniels were the founders of the first cable company in Belize in the early 80s, and Mr. Esquivel didn't have a license, but Mr. Esquivel was so close with the founder, Mr. Lloyd Graniel, that he would often be out there with Mr. Lloyd. They run cable in at Kings Park, which strictly speaking was illegal, but again, very prescient, very ahead of the curve. And so he would be helping Mr. Graniel roll cable out there in the Kings Park area.
Right, and arguably that is where the start, of our international television experiences by and large began. And in some respect we can probably pay homage to Sir Manuel for Belizeans' love for the Chicago Cubs.
Indeed, and there, that's Audrey Wallace, am I right there?
Yes.
Right, that's Audrey Wallace.
The former Chief Executive Officer in the Office of the Prime Minister under the Barrow administration.
Right, and a very close friend of the Esquivels as well.
Indeed.
Of Lady Cathy and Sir Manuel. And here we have another Minister of Government.
Minister of Human Development and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, the Honorable Dolores Balderramos Garcia, who is now paying her respects in the State Dining Room here at the Government House in Belize City, where the urn containing the remains of Sir Manuel is lying in state. Following her is the Minister of Education, Culture, Science and Technology and E-Governance, the Honorable Francis Fonseca. Again, as you see, the number of ministers of government are just coming out of a just concluded cabinet meeting. As you know, cabinet meets here on this compound on Tuesdays in Belize City, and now after the meeting, the ministers are paying respects to the urn. I believe that's the Minister of the Blue Economy, the Honorable Abner Andre Perez. We see Minister, I believe that's Minister Musa there, writing his condolences in the registry, the condolence book here at the Government House. Each of them taking a few seconds. I assume it's a silent prayer in some cases, or a moment of silence in some measure at the urn. Again, being guarded, of course, by the Belize Defense Force. And we've witnessed the change of guard earlier in our broadcast. Two changes, actually. Right, and now we have the Minister of Health and Wellness, the Honorable Kevin Bernard. Following Minister Bernard is the Minister of National Defense and Border Security, the Honorable Florencia Marin Jr. Again,
we know that when Mr. Esquivel came into politics, his father was in full form already as a senior member of the House of Representatives.
right,
And he was in fact the leader of the opposition
right at that
in
time.
the House when the UDP won and George Price lost to Derek Aikman.
Right, in
So
Freetown.
Mr. Esquivel faced off against Florencia Marin Sr.
Right,
many times, and there we see
the Attorney General.
Florencia's senior's daughter.
Right, the Attorney General Magali Marin Young.
Indeed, so again, their father and Mr. Esquivel would have faced off in the House many times, but again, it was a different era, and the tone of the debate was very different,
Civil, certainly.
far more civil. Yes,
The Honorable Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Culture, Science and Technology and E-Governance, Dr. Louis Zabane.
no, that's
I'm sorry,
Chris
that is Senator Christopher Coy, the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance
an economic development,
and Economic Development.
and
And now we have the Honorable Oscar Rekenya, who is the Minister of Rural Development, Labor and Local Government.
indeed.
Minister Balderramos Garcia is still writing her condolences in the registry. That's just in the room across from where Jules and I are stationed. We are on the outside, well, on the veranda here, sort of giving you this color commentary and this discussion on what's happening here and the significance and the impact of Sir Manuel's life on Belize. Jules, we were talking a little bit earlier on the various things, the various benchmarks that sort of shaped Sir Manuel's administration, both administrations, both of them from 84 to 89, and again from 1993 to 1998. The 1990s was certainly perhaps a critical political juncture in the history of Belize, wouldn't you say? Because that 93 administration that Sir Manuel led was, I believe, wasn't that the first coalition government that we had in the history?
First and only.
First and only coalition government, where we're meaning that the government was run by and large, one party, but with the support of a minority party. And in this case, it was the NABR, sort of a renegade party, a breakaway party from the UDP that split over, I believe, wasn't it the Maritime Areas Bill of 1991?
Yes, indeed, that's what they split over. So yeah, so that coalition came together very quickly when they called the snap election
Right, because that time
of
the
1993. They called it in May for the end of June.
end of June, because constitutionally the election wasn't due until 1994. And
Right.
Mr. Price took a political gamble and lost.
Right, because the UDP had just lost the Freetown by-election,
Right,
where Derek Aikman was removed from the House of Representatives as a bankrupt,
right,
and they had also lost the town council
right, the
elections.
municipal elections of that.
Right, so it seemed like a prime time to strike,
To strike.
and Mr. Esquivel led a UDP that literally came together. UDP and ABR alliance that literally came together in 30 days.
Right,
For the most unlikely, I would say what you want about Mr. Esquivel being a political dunce or a political neophyte. Mr. Esquivel pulled off the greatest upset. He led the UDP to the greatest upset in Belize's political history.
because all the pundits at the time, I remember the prognosticators, certainly, I mean, not in the way that we see them now, but public commentary certainly was on the side that Mr. Price is going to repeat and have a back-to-back.
Yeah, just once the election from
Right, and there was no reason why people thought that he would lose, and he did.
And that again, you know what it is. While Mr. Esquivel was not the most political political person, people at the end of the day had a high level of confidence in him.
Indeed.
They had a high level of confidence in his integrity and his competence to lead, and that's why the UDP won the most unlikely, the greatest political upset in Belize's political history.
Indeed.
In 1993.
In 1993, and I think some may argue that those members of the electorate at that time perhaps were having buyer's remorse of some of the difficulties that the Price administration had faced between 89 and 93, and so they thought that because of Sir Manuel's pragmatism, I think they felt that it was imperative that they give him a second chance to help us navigate through some of the difficult financial situations that we faced, and a number of other things that were emerging at the time.
Right, yes. I think people were sort of put off. They felt that there was this incipient and growing corruption in the PUP,
Right.
which was crowned by Jorge Spat's famous bloated contract speech
Right.
at the police passing out.
I remember that.
Right, and so that sort of put a very sharp pointer on the suspicious projects, or in the public mind, suspicious projects that had been ballooning all over the place, and that really was a changing of the guard. And Mr. Esquivel was Mr. Esquivel's victory. Sir Manuel's victory was like a counter to that. But we saw what happened. He lost resoundingly.
5
His
years
party
later.
lost resoundingly 5 years later. And since then, that sort of money politics, as it were, if I can call it euphemistically, that has been the prevailing sentiment and order of politics in modern times in Belize.
And Ms. Kathy points that out in her book, which I think is a fabulous read, by the way. I just got my first copy of the book yesterday, and I spent between yesterday afternoon and last night covering 150 pages of that book, and it's full of it. The only reason I had to put it down is because I had to come into work this morning.
Okay.
And you had to, it helps you to understand the thought process of Sir Manuel, but at the same time help you understand what Miss Cathy was thinking about the decisions that her husband had to inevitably make, and the players who were in the political scene at the time. We hear of the impact of.
We know that the former Prime Minister, sorry to interrupt you,
Right.
and its successor to Sir Manuel, Dean Barrow, is here to
Right,
pay
I was
his
just
respects
about to
now.
seg into that. The fact that his role was integral in that second term of the Esquivel administration, and he would end up leading the party for 22 years, from 1998 to 2020. He would lead the party 22 years and serve as the longest serving Prime Minister for almost 13 years, the Right Honorable Dean Barrow. He's
So
here
we see him here.
giving his respects to his former boss.
And we know that the Right Honorable Barrow has been asked to perform the eulogy
Yes,
at tomorrow's funeral,
Yes.
or sorry, one of the remembrances.
is at tomorrow's
The
event.
eulogy will be done by his son,
David.
David, and Dean Barrow will do one of the remembrances, and John Briceño will do the other.
Okay, the Honorable Francis Fonseca is writing his in the remembrance book. Former Prime Minister Barrow has paid respects.
He's in a house with lone PUP right now.
By and large, yes, pretty much.
I imagine he's going to pay his respects to the family who I guess are sitting nearby under one of the tents,
Indeed.
and so I imagine he's going to pay his respects to them. And we have to be honest, we know that Mr. Esquivel, I think they'll have the changing of the sword party again. We know that Mr. Esquivel and Mrs. Esquivel, Sir Manuel and Lady Esquivel, had a falling out with the UDP in or around 2015, I want to say, because of some goings on at the tourism board where there was a kind of palace coup
Right.
against Laura Esquivel Frampton. And that created, they resigned all their government posts, all the boards they were serving on,
Yes,
etc.
I
They
remember that
resigned.
clearly.
So there had been some sort of bad blood. And when I interviewed the Right Honorable Barrow the other day, he in fact said that he regrets that after that little rift was created, he did not follow up with Sir Manuel to see how he was doing to look after his health. And he apologized publicly for that lapse in attention to a man he esteems above all others
Yes.
in terms of public life.
And
And
that
the
was
man
an,
who was his mentor.
and that was an important concession on the part of the former Prime Minister because of how tumultuous that time was between the administration and the Esquivel family. And as you rightly said, they had resigned from all their board positions. I remember Laura left the Belize Tourism Board at that point. I think she was replaced by Selene Matos, I think, in the interim. I think they had an interim
No, it was Selene, then Laura.
Okay.
And then after Laura, I think it was Karen
Bevins, right. I think that was the timeline. But by and large, it reflected, I think it reflected something that I hinted earlier, Jules, the fact that the United Democratic Party, there was always the nature of the party, and I think it's because of its history, the vestiges of that history, the fact that there were three competing political parties who came together to form one, and then so all of these ideologies, even though they are somewhat aligned, they differ in their own way, and so you see that kind of divergence of opinion on a lot of public policy issues. I remember specifically there was the challenge of the Section 53 the Section 53 law, and there was the Prime Minister Dean Barrow clearly said that the government at that time would try to defend and uphold the law as it existed, whereas there were some people within the organization who felt differently and told him so. And so, it's one of those things where there was always an encouragement of a difference in political opinion, a difference in ideology, a difference in principle, and by and large without ramifications, I think. I mean, that's depending that really depends on whom you ask, but certainly from my perspective, it certainly felt that way. We were able to express opinions and to be able to think and to add constructively to the debate on policy issues, even within an organization as important as the United Democratic Party was. And so that was...
I think that plurality has always been a part of the UDP, because the PUP was always, because of its nascence and its history, was always more monolithic.
Right.
And the UDP was always more pluralistic and remains so to this day.
Right.
Which one is a better model? It's hard to say, because they both had, the PUP have just come off a disastrous losing streak, and the UDP looks like it's starting one.
Right.
Right? So I don't know which model is best, but the cultures of the party are very different. And the UDP, what I call being quarrelsome, is in fact an expression of that plurality of opinions.
Indeed.
And sometimes it's hard to find consensus in that.
Right.
And that's certainly, you have to remember, Manuel Esquivel came from the Liberal Party, and Dean Barrow came from the PDM. Right? I don't think those those were differences between them in 2000 plus. Nobody even remembers
Right.
what those things are. But I'm just saying that they weren't always on the same page. They weren't necessarily from the same root,
Right.
same political route and orientation. But as I said, Right Honorable Barrow has apologized for not looking into the well-being of Mr. Esquivel, not following up
Right.
in that interim when there had been when relations had sort of frozen over between the Esquivels and the Dean Barrow-led UDP.
Right. And I think to move on to that now is the fact that there are still officials still coming in, paying their respects. I see the Attorney General, Magali Marin Young, putting her her thoughts into the condolence book, and I believe this is an opportunity where there is I think we're changing the guard now, or I think we just did.
I think we just did,
I think we just did. Again, this happens on a routine basis. I think it's every hour, if I'm correct,
Yes,
Jules?
I believe so, yeah.
Right, and this is what you're witnessing here at the Government House in Belize City on this first day, marking the State Memorial for the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel, KCMG, PC, again, two-term Prime Minister of Belize.
It seems that the invited persons and the officials are dealing well enough with the fact that there is a disembodied object, so to speak, an urn. And, you know, it's an interesting precedent because usually we have a coffin. I'm not sure if the Menita's coffin was opened, but usually you have a coffin and to fixate your intentions or send up your prayers. In this case, we have an urn. And, it seems to be working.
Right.
It's a fairly straightforward operation, but it's again unprecedented.
Yes. And the significance of that shouldn't be lost in this discussion because it reflected, I think, certainly, the fact that while he grew up, Sir Manuel, as you pointed out, grew up Roman Catholic, in his later years as an adult, he relied more on the practical side of things, the practical side of science, and there was not necessarily room for this religious component of things, and that's the reason why we're not having an official service, but rather a state memorial. And tomorrow there's going to be a sort of a quasi celebration with musical artists and a few words from the family and very important figures in Belizean society.
Yes, it's our first secular state funeral.
Right.
Our very first, and but tomorrow there will be a tinge of a religious component.
Right.
When the bells will toll.
Right.
The church bells will toll.
At exactly 10 minutes past 2 o'clock. I think that's what the program says.
Right.
To sort of signal the start of tomorrow's event and culminating this 2 days of mourning for the Right Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel.
Right. So it's the interest. It's again a precedent setting memorial, because again it's usually a state funeral.
Right.
But and tomorrow will be a concert, not a funeral. No religious rites will be performed. And we know that a number of the selections tomorrow will be classical. There'll be Rachmaninoff. There will be, I believe, I saw the rondon, some Bach.
Yes.
As well. So we know that it will be classically tinged, and it will also have some local components.
Yes.
As well. And apparently these were the musical preferences of Sir Manuel. We see someone else still paying respects. Not sure who that is specifically?
I'm guessing it's one of the invited guests of the family.
Right.
I think that's what it is in this case. But Jules, if you could sort of reflect, we are looking also simultaneously at the montage that was put together of pictures submitted by the family. And there are three very important photographs that stuck out to me. The picture, I think, dating back to 1985, when Queen Elizabeth II, the nation's head of state, made her
Came
first
to this house.
right at this house in 1985 on her first visit. I also look at the pictures that he had taken with two U.S. presidents, the late Ronald Reagan and the former President Bill Clinton. If you could sort of reflect on why diplomacy played such an important role in the administrations of Sir Manuel Esquivel, particularly the relationships with the US and the UK.
Well, first of all, I note that the two visits by the Queen happened not during George Price
but happened both
or the
under
PUP, and I don't think that's an accident. I believe the PUP, the genesis of the PUP is a nationalist party. It is an anti-colonialist party, and we know that George Price was famously charged for seditious intent in a ludicrous charge by the colonial government at the time for saying that they threw toilet paper at the Queen when she arrived in New York. It was what is called a ticker tape parade.
Right.
And he was ridiculously dragged before the court for saying anything that anyone in a free democracy should be able to say. But such was the colonial rule. Such was the colonial rule. I'm sorry about that song. Their monitor just fell because the breeze they pick up out here. But so I think that it's important that the British, certainly from the British perspective, that they saw Sir Manuel as more welcoming. He had a British wife. He had studied briefly in the UK, and he also, if you know Sir Manuel, he was very open to foreign direct investment, that sort of thing. So certainly the relation with the US as well. We know that during his term, 84 to 89 is when the DA became very active in Belize, and they were involved in the spraying of marijuana fields, etc. And he was criticized at the time for being too friendly with the US. We know that spraying of paraquat, I believe, on marijuana fields did affect other crops, did affect beekeepers. So it was controversial, and we know that the drug smuggling out of Belize was a major industry. So I'm saying that he certainly was seen as closer to the United States on a number of issues, and certainly closer to the British, because the UDP, let's not forget the Loyal and Patriotic Order of the Bayonet, it has a strong pro-colonial bent in its history, and the PUP is strongly anti-colonial. So I certainly think that under the UDP 84 to 89, there was a closer relationship with Washington and with London, and those were there were clear expressions of that. Certainly Mr. Reagan also met with Mr. Price. We know there's this famous video of Mr. Price giving that a quite remarkable speech there at the White House. So it's not that relations were not normal with the US, but I think they found, in 1984, they found a more willing partner in Esquivel. And that's because the PUP has always been, to its credit, anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, right? And I think by 89, that ship had sort of sailed, and then by 1998, the PUP was as pro-capitalist and right-wing as the UDP was. So everything that diverges eventually converges again.
Right.
Right?
And I'm so glad that you sort of put all of that into context, because it illustrates how oftentimes the political climate is untenable. It changes, it diversifies over time, and We've seen how that changed at the end of the 21st century to what we're experiencing now in the 20th, the end of the 20th century into the beginning of the 21st century, and what we're experiencing now. And I think this is a reflection of each of the pillars that our political leaders have put in on behalf of Belize, and certainly Sir Manuel's contribution was integral in all of that.
Yes, and when we look at his legacy, it's interesting because the legacy is physical. Yes, infrastructure project. You mentioned the central bank earlier.
Right.
We received a quick correction call that it was not 50 million. They did it for less than that.
Okay. Well, I think that was the number that was being used as part of the propaganda.
Propaganda.
Yes,
they follow the propaganda.
Right.
But no, I'm just saying that I think that that central bank is certainly one of the proudest legacies of Sir Manuel. It remains in impeccable condition. It is invulnerable. The level of the quality of construction that went into it, and it is certainly a proud emblem of the financial solidity of the currency and of the economy. It's important that such symbols exist. I despise the design, but that's personal. I would have, at the time, I certainly would have preferred a more modern style building, but that's that my thing. I have my own views on it, but I'm just saying it remains, and it's still, when you go into it, it does not look antiquated, it does not look run down, thanks to the management of the central bank. So it was a proper purpose-built building. These buildings have to, it can't be no semi-demi building.
Right.
It has to demonstrate that this place, the Central Bank of Belize, controls the commanding heights of the economy. And that building says that. We see drone shots of it to this day in central bank ads, and it still looks spectacular.
Indeed, it does.
So I'm saying the legacy is not only these physical things. It is really something when you leave a legacy, as Mr. Price did, that your personal style imbues a legacy of its own. Mr. Price's unmatched humility, his asceticism, his actually monkish devotion to nation building is what we remember of him. There were untold infrastructural and physical developments, the construction of Belmopan, all these things that happened during Mr. Price's tenure. He built the nation. But when we think of Mr. Price, we don't think of the physical things he did. We think of the moral. He left our moral account in such a surplus, right? He was such a man of such unimpeachable integrity, Mr. Price. And when we think of Mr. Esquivel, certainly we think of someone for whom integrity was axiomatic. It was engendered in his being. It was not an effort. It was not a speech. It was who he was.
He was.
And that, I really think, is the legacy of great men. We don't look at what they do. We look at who they were. Great men and women. We don't look at the physical remains that they left. We look at what they imbued us with. A sense of nationalism in the case of Mr. Price. A sense of dignity and democracy in the case of Mr. Esquivel, and decency, an essential, unshakable decency.
I think I could not have said it better myself, Jules. That all of what you've just said, the entire embodiment of that, the cadence and the spirit of that, led, as I've repeated throughout this presentation, the pillar on which the decisions that he took as the leader of government for those 2 terms were built upon. But I think by and large it was a reflection of who he was as a father, as a teacher, and just an overall Belizean, a humble servant to this country. And I think that was by and large what drove and built on the spirit on which his integrity is fostered on. I think that's really what it is. And I think that in the years to come, when history continues, the leaders that have succeeded Sir Manuel will probably can only hope that that when history takes account of their tenure, I think they can only hope that it would be remembered in the same way. I think that's really what the best that they can hope for, is that it's remembered in the same way. We have been exposed in such measurable ways to so many different things, and I think that's because we're living in the social media era. But the current Prime Minister and the last one, I think, will hope that Belizeans remember them in the same kind of way when it's their turn. And we're not saying that that's going to happen anytime soon, but when we come to that inevitable juncture, I hope that they will see themselves and the decisions they made in the same kind of way. And how Belizeans think of that, I think, will perhaps, well, I mean, that will be told eventually. Yeah.
I think that the two words, or the word that we would say, because Mr. Price and Mr. Esquivel are very different people.
Yes.
And they were very different leaders. But the one thing we can agree on with both of them was that they were humble.
Yes.
I don't think we will, in 20 years, be praising Mr. Musa, Mr. Barrow, or Mr. Brisenger for humility. We may surely praise them for other excellent
things.
Character traits which they epitomize. But that the single thread between the first two prime ministers of Belize for the first 17 years of nationhood, the single thread is humility. We've left that behind now, but I'm just saying that it's important that we key in on that as the commonality. One was an arch-Catholic, one was an atheist. One wore Wayabera, one wears suit and tie. They are about to move the urn. We have the urn party here. So they are taking the urn back to the home. At number 8, Daly Street. We're taking the urn back to the home at number 8, Daly Street.
Right. And then it will be brought here tomorrow for the second part of this two-day memorial for the former Prime Minister. The Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Esquivel, KCMG, former Prime Minister of Belize from 1984 to 1989 and 1989 to 1993 to 1998. We're remembering him on this day. As we reported, he died on the 10th of February at age 81. He leaves behind his wife, who's the chief mourner, Lady Esquivel, and their children, David, Laura, and Ruth. And they are here on this occasion. And as we now witness the urn taken back to the family house on Daly Street in Belize City. You're watching a special nationwide broadcast of this very important occasion. We're remembering Sir Manuel Esquivel. We have members of the Belize Defense Force now heading out. The state memorial, furnished by members of the BDF. The funeral director is Warrant Officer Class 2 Delton Morgan, the regimental sergeant major for 1st Infantry Battalion. The urn party commander is Major Ruben Kowo. Escorts to the urn are Captain Jairo Che and Captain Galen Roberto. The cushion escort is Captain Adrian Bosch. The sword party commander is Captain Elmer Mo. As you've seen, the firing party commander is Staff Sergeant Gladstone Palacio. On this occasion, the chief mourner, in this case Lady Esquivel, has been assigned an aide-de-camp. And that aide-de-camp is Major Megan Aspinall. The state memorial is being facilitated by the 4th Sergeant Major, Warrant Class Officer 1, Wilfredo Mahano, a graduate of the NCO Leadership of Excellence and Sergeant Major Academy. What we're witnessing now is the actual slow march of the urn, and again music furnished by the Belize Defense Force Band. And Jules, the weather out here today, very wet, skies are overcast, sort of gives us a somber but reflective, introspective moment, I think, for Belize and Belizeans who are tuned into this broadcast. Won't you agree?
Yes, indeed, Dale. The weather, we would say, is very British. It feels like a normal day in London in terms of the cold and the constant, the steady drizzle. And indeed, it's a day that lends itself to somber reflection upon the life of Sir Manuel. And we're fortunate that a biography has been written about him. And we know that a great biography was also written about Mr. Price. And we certainly hope that this will be done for all our leaders, because it's really important that we catalog the important role that
each of them played.
And the formative years of these persons, because you learn so much about Sir Manuel by learning of his background and his years in teaching. He was once a union leader for the Christian Democratic Union.
Yes.
He fought for better pay for teachers.
Yes.
Right? He wrote for the newspaper for many years, the Chamber Reporter.
Yes.
So these are extremely important, that you can see how small lives can end up in a state memorial, as it were in this case.
Yes. But even though the nation is collectively mourning the passing of the nation's second post-independence Prime Minister, it offers an opportunity for us to think, reflect inwardly and outwardly where Belize has come, where Belize is, and where Belize is going. I think that this is a historical lesson for everybody to remember and to reflect and to appreciate very difficult sacrifices when you're in leadership that you have to make. And a lot of times, and as Ms. Cafe concedes in her book, Still Waters, which is a fantastic read, by the way, lots of times Sir Manuel had to give up very important things, very important milestones in his own family to make these very difficult decisions on behalf of Belize and Belizeans. The thousands of people that relied on his stewardship as the nation's head of government, this is an opportunity to, in some measure, say thanks for a yeoman's work.
Indeed, a life's work.
Right.
Right? Because we know that that politics and national leadership are all-consuming. But we should never forget that in his later life, Sir Manuel was a very doting grandfather.
Indeed.
I believe he was grandfather to, I want to venture the number, but I want to say certainly more than 6 that his children's offspring, and he was very doting. I know that his daughter Ruth's children lived with them for many years.
Yes.
In the home at 8 Daly Street, and he was such a doting grandfather. He would take his granddaughter to and from school, and he was a great comfort to her.
And that granddaughter that you're speaking about, Chelsea, has done really well as a culinary master in her own right, receiving accolades recently. And I'm sure that Sir Manuel and the entire family were very proud of her achievement.
Indeed. So, I think that if you ask him what his greatest accomplishments were, he would probably point to the accomplishments of his grandchildren.
Indeed.
Because I know that was really at the center of his life later on, and it certainly gave him life, because while he was politically involved, he was never politically obsessed.
And that's the difference. I think that's a fundamental difference from what we've seen with leaders now, not just at the national level, but at the municipal level too, this obsession with the holding on to power. And he teaches us a valuable lesson with his own life, the fact that you don't have to be obsessed with power and almost ascribing God unto yourself to do right by the Belizean people. And he did that throughout his entire political career. Even and I keep on stressing the decisions that he has made, thinking only of the best interest of the country, even if it meant costing him votes at the election and he'd never be elected again, or the fact that you run the risk of losing in such a spectacular way. He did that with the thought process that ultimately Belizeans, by and large, will benefit, and that's the way I think that his family and his supporters would certainly want Sir Manuel to be remembered.
Okay, so we see the vehicle with the urn leaving now, the BDF van with the urn, and I think that signals
the end of this presentation on the first day for the State Memorial for the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Manuel Amadeo Esquivel. Jules, it's been an interesting 3 hours, spending this particular time in our history, witnessing this unfold, certainly with a journalist and a newsman of your stature, helping us to appreciate the context of Sir Manuel's life and what it meant to Belize and Belizeans. So I truly thank you for this opportunity to have, spent these last couple of hours with you to discuss the man who Sir Manuel was. And so we'll be picking up this tomorrow. We'll be bringing to you the second day of this very important historical event. So on behalf of everyone here at the press office, and we'd like to thank the media organizations who've collaborated for this effort. Certainly Love FM and Love Television, Channel 7 and Channel 5, and those who are rebroadcasting it to their listeners. We say thank you on behalf of everyone, and enjoy the remainder of your Tuesday.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Dale.